I'm here with Laura Lee Gulledge, the author of The Dark Matter of Mona Starr and Other Stories, and we're going to do an interview and just ask a few questions. And so the first one is, how did you become a writer slash artist?
Oh, well, thanks for chatting with me. I love geeking out about the creative process. And I started off by drawing pictures, and it took me decades to figure out that pictures were stories. Because in my brain, books were stories and art was like a different thing. And so it was only after sort of doing art therapy on myself for a long time with like self-portraits, but with like writing on the side that I realized like, shoot, this is like visual storytelling. And these drawings are actually scenes. They're just not in a linear order. Because for me, storytelling is like A happens and B, then C, then D. But my brain doesn't work like that. So I guess it took me a long time to realize I was a storyteller because I don't think in words, I think in pictures. And when I was your age, there was not a graphic novel section of the library. So this is like a whole new world where people who think more visually, we can express ourselves, I think, a lot easier because it combines words and pictures. So I started by drawing forever, um, with things like Garfield when I was a kid, and loving newspaper comic strips. And I only read a graphic novel when I was 27. So I was very late. So anyone who thinks that they're like behind as a writer or an artist, you are not behind. Because a lot of us, you put in your work on like one path and you can move laterally. So you follow whatever feels good to you, and you don't even know what genres and mediums are going to emerge. So I'm a very recent writer, but a long time drawer. So yeah.
Oh, what was the first graphic novel that you read?
Oh, my first book, baby Paige. She's my miracle baby. I moved to New York when I was sort of hitting a creative wall in Virginia where I grew up. Of sort of people are like, "Oh, aren't those cute drawings? We don't know what you're good for, but you're good for something, kid." And I'm like, "Well, I'm going to go to the big city where there's just all the people who are like really trying new things out and figure out like what is my movement? Where do I belong?" And I was immediately handed a graphic novel, like, here you go, you dummy. How come you don't know what this exists? And I read like 4 graphic novels and then decided I'm gonna try to do one. And the first draft was really terrible because I didn't know this medium. So I actually like I joined a studio with cartoonists and was sort of asking questions. And I was like teaching myself more about this language. So Paige is the story of me and my sketchbook, but filtered through a 16-year-old alter ego and sort of mashed up with me in New York. Because when I moved to New York, I didn't know anybody. And so I really learned to channel a lot of processing through my sketchbook because I didn't have friends around to talk to. So Paige is sort of, she's like an assemblage of 2 different parts of my life and then filtered through a fictional character. So so yeah, I feel like my approach is different than a lot of creators who, if they do auto bio, it seems to be more just like straight up, this was my life and I'm drawing about it. Or some people, there's just all fiction, like I'm just making up complete new worlds. And I'm in this weird spot where, yeah, it's all based on stuff that's happened in my life, but in my brain, maybe because I'm autistic, but it's easy for me to sort of take these different moments in the file cabinet from my life of experiences and things I've drawn about, and to sort of pull them out, certain things out, and sort of put just them together and see what story that tells. Because my brain is like that. So it's like an assemblage where everything is rooted in stuff that happened, but it's all like morphed and I don't know, like thrown in a cauldron and with some new information and seeing like what it cooks and turns into. So one of these days it'd be nice to do a book that's like just me, because that sounds a lot easier than all this Yeah, all this processing. But yeah, Paige is the first book baby, and she's my miracle because I didn't know what I was doing, but it worked out. And she actually was like really well received. And I thought that I was a fluke, that I tricked everybody because I was like, they're gonna realize I'm not a real cartoonist because there's no other book that looks like her. But now I realize that it's okay if you're doing your own thing in comics. That's part of what makes it a beautiful ecosystem, is that you can have your own particular style, and it actually, I don't know, adds a good flavor into the ecosystem. My sort of magical realism style.
And for what you were saying about like you take the semblance of your life and combine it with a fictional character, is that how you wrote The Dark Matter of Mona Starr?
It is. Yeah, I had written this whole other story with this depressive violinist character, and her name was Harmony, and it was called The Symphony of the Spheres, and it was all about these 7 different girls around the world who each heard a part of a harmony at the River of Dreams, and they brought it together. It like healed the waters of the world. It was this whole thing, and it was funny. Like my agent, my editor, I forget who it was, but they basically were like, we don't like all of this. We just want the depressive violinist. We just want her story. I was like, you don't want all this cool stuff? Because in the arts, yeah, people don't want what you think is cool. Like, that's not what they want. They want like the personal stuff. Like, what's like the real heart of the matter? No puns intended. And so that's when I sat down and I was like, well, shoot, if I was going to do a book about depression, what would that look like? So I looked at all of my art that I've just drew and drew for years, because I have it all in a one Flickr gallery. So I literally did a sweep of all of them, and I just pulled out all the ones that felt like they were part of Mona's story, this new character. I was like, I feel like this might be part of it, and this might be part of it, because you already have drawn about so many things. And that's when I realized that, oh, I need to sort of root her in me as a high schooler. So actually, she's the book that is set at my high school, where visually looks like me in high school, where I was playing violin. So I actually wanted to root it in very true, honest things. But the experiences that she has as a 14-year-old were not my experiences. The emotional core was based more on things that happened to me in my 20s and 30s, because I didn't really get pummeled with depression till I was 18. So I want to take some of these experiences and like adapt them to a younger character, because I have so much compassion for young people right now. And I feel like I can't pretend like I know what your experience is. Like, oh, I'm going to write, like, I know what a 14-year-old is going through, because I don't. But I want to inspire the current 14-year-olds to tell their stories. So I like to take the emotional story of like from my life, but then just sort of put it a different face on it, a different situation that made them feel that same emotion. Because I want to make stories that other people can relate to, instead of just, this is my experience and I want you to know my experience. If anything, I want you to know more about to see you reflected in it. So yeah, so it's very therapeutic. Yeah, if you write an alter ego of yourself to work through emotions, like, oh, it's very liberating.
Yeah. I particularly love the character of Mona Starr because I personally relate to her, and like even little details are so like I connect to it so well. I play violin in my orchestra, and I also really love to express myself through like art and comics and in writing in that way. And then even as far as like I also, one of my best friends, she lives in a different state than me, and so like we still try to like keep in contact. And so I just personally
Oh
related to her
yeah.
character so much, and it's one of my favorite books because of it.
Oh, yeah, I grew up playing violin. I love the violinist. And actually come from, there's violinists in my family. That's sort of like the ladies in the family. We're musicians. And so if anything, I tried not to take myself too seriously in violin, because the bar was like too high.
Yeah.
And I found that drawing on paper, it was so much, I would get more scared with performing. And there was a lot of anxiety. So it's kind of fun to we awaken that in Mona because I loved playing in a group. It's part of what drew me into like partnering, the idea of like, how can you collaborate with other people instead of just doing things like by yourself? My current musical outlet, because I pulled out the violin and I like, actually when I was like starting Mona, I was like, let's pull out the violin. And of course it's not a great quality instrument and it's all out. It did not sound like what I thought in my head. So I was like, let's put that down. But I am a huge audiophile. I am really into ecstatic dance and I make a ton of playlists. And I actually write a ton of music. Like whenever I'm by myself, I sing songs. I just don't record them because I don't know. It's because then it'll get in my head. But yeah, and the friends far away, I feel like that's really relatable as well. Yeah, that character I sort of wrote about a friend of mine who life had sort of, they were an partner, but life had sort of like pushed us a little apart and I missed them. So I actually wrote them as a character to help me heal that loss of like missing that friend. So alas, I don't have a friend in Hawaii who I'm keeping in touch with. That one's a little bit more my head.
The next question, in the author's note of Mona Starr, you said, thankfully, I surrendered to my creative impulses and learned to use them as a resource to help me express, understand, and heal myself. What did that look like for you?
So I think we are all born with a genius, which is that little voice that has the zany ideas, like that's your genius. It's like the connector between us and wherever ideas come from. And I used to really judge that voice and really deny like, oh, don't say that. Or like, oh no, don't do that. Like, oh, that's too weird. That's too big. Because I realize my genius loves to sort of push the envelope. It comes up with something that we haven't seen before. And it's like, oh, do we really have to do that? Yeah, I guess we got the idea. So those impulses and ideas, when I was young, I would judge them of like, that's not good enough. But really now I see it's not our responsibility to judge the ideas. Our job is just to let them through because they're there for a reason. So for me, it meant doing very personal art about my feelings, things that were not pretty, things that were not marketable, things that were not cool, but things that I needed to make just for my own like self-therapy. Yeah, so some weird stuff, some dark stuff, and some cliche stuff. And so I worked in sketchbooks for 4 years straight, only in sketchbooks to help me focus on just making the art I needed to make instead of something that, oh, this is going to go in a gallery or this is something I'm going to sell. It's like, no, you need to just make the stuff that you need to make and work through all of that, all those messy feelings. And then later you start to pull out like, oh, hey, there's like a gem and here's a gem. But yeah, at first just, and if it helps, like keep it private. Like I kept my stuff to private for myself for a while. Because if you start thinking about like what others will think of looking at your art, it sort of short circuits it. So that's why you just got to make what you need to make. And yeah, especially when you're young, it's because you don't always also have control over what's coming out. So yeah, you don't judge the art babies. You just go with them. They're leading you somewhere.
So you were telling us about graphic medicine in the email. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So when I first got in the comics, there was like the Capes comics and then indie comics. And then there was like manga, and that's like it in the ecosystem. And I was like, I don't really belong in any of these categories. So I'm just a little misfit. But over the years, more storytellers have come into comics, more queer storytellers, more BIPOC storytellers, more women storytellers. And it's created a richer ecosystem. So one new category that's emerged is graphic medicine, because now there's so many comics that are exploring mental health, wellness, healthcare advocacy, because comics is such a good format for talking about this information. that it's like own thing. So I'm like, I finally have a category, which is great because now it's a lot easier for me to recommend like other books. And actually, there's even bibliotherapy groups where libraries will have like graphic novel reading group, but also with like therapeutic discussion. So it's kind of really cool that I don't know. I feel like it's really timely and it sort of can take some of the sting out of heavy content when it's a cartoon. Um, and so yeah, so it's a and I love to introduce it to people because it's sort of to me the balance of like superhero comics, which is very like masculine, like external power sort of dynamics, but this is much more like an inner world, inner experience, inner strength, more emotional resiliency. So I think it's just such a I'm like, oh yeah, take it, superhero comics. You know, they're fine, but I'm not their audience. So
And where would you like it to go? Like your vision for how it would look, maybe like 5 or 10 years in the future, the whole like medium.
oh gosh. Well, I just want more people to keep pushing the envelope of what's possible. Because since I didn't grow up reading graphic novels, I see it as a very flexible Wild West medium where you can take a lot of risks and you can push things. So I guess what I see, something that I've been working on is leaning into this sort of self-care, not self-care, self-help graphic novel. I guess bookstores call it personal development. But this intersection on the bookshelf of bringing comics more into like the psychological sphere. Because like I love telling stories about like characters going through experiences that are healing and sort of modeling these ways to like work through emotions and the voices in our head. But I've been thinking much more about being like, what if we're just like more directive and do like straight up graphic novel self-help? Because I feel like people need more tools and more sort of prescriptive, I don't know, action versus just an abstract story. So that's something that I've been thinking about more is that, yeah, that I hope that more comics enter that adult realm of sharing this information because I love doing the YA stuff as well, but my audience is like growing up and I love the idea of spilling more into the adult bookshelf with sharing this information. So yeah.
Do you have any specific examples of books you would recommend in the genre of the graphic medicine?
Yeah, I guess for younger readers, Raina Telgemeier's Guts is a really good example. It's sort of a parallel. I feel like Raina and I are always working on parallel projects at the same time. We're so funny, but we're friends. It's cool.
Oh,
Because
that's
her
cool.
character has stomach irritable bowel syndrome, you know, based on her experience growing up. And then my character Mona has like intestinal issues. Like we both got anxiety in our belly. Um, and I feel like Katie Green's Lighter Than My Shadow really blew me away. It's a really big book, but it's oh, it's so beautiful. And she draws about her eating disorder very similarly to how I draw about the matter. So it's kind of interesting to me how it's we're all drawing about similar things, but just in different ways. Um, and the first graphic medicine book I read that really made me feel like maybe I can try to do this was Ellen Forney's Marbles. It's like mania, depression, no, Mania, Michelangelo, and Me, something like that is the subtitle. And it's about her journey exploring her bipolarness and the way she drew about it with such humor and vulnerability and with like diagrams and I don't know, she expressed a story in a way that I had not seen before. That I was like, okay, well now I know that I'm not bipolar because I'm reading her experience. But also like, yeah, like what's a thing that I can illustrate on the bookshelf to accompany these other books. So yeah, so there's a few.
Are you working on any new projects currently?
I am. The new book I'm working on, gosh, I've been working on this book. I actually started working on this book idea like 7 years ago. And then I like put it away. And like a year ago, I pulled it back. I was like, it's back again. Um, but it's sort of in this personal development graphic novel direction about working with your genius. Because my last book was about my matter, because there's two very strong voices in my mind. There's the matter and then there's my genius. So there's sort of like my angel and my devil. So last book was about matter, and sort of this book is much more specifically about my genius, which I personify as a rainbow star named Jean Genie. And we've been in intentional partnership for almost a decade now. And they are actually like, I don't know, they're like a part of my life and how I structure my world. So much so that I was like, yeah, we should do a book about how to have a healthy relationship. Because also when you have envision your creativity more of like this helper spirit, I think it's a lot healthier for us as creatives, because then we have like a partner in the process, and it sort of helps take some ego out of it, where yeah, it can blame Jean for things. And um and yeah, well, I guess maybe it sounds strange, but that's how I like to use imagination to help us with operating in our life. Because if you have an imagination, you can use it to your advantage. Um, so yeah, but I'm also just making lots of zines. Zines have been my new thing in COVID, just endless zines on different topics. Yeah, zine is like a little small, little 8-page fold. Um, which has been fun for me to explore different ideas. That's not like a whole book that takes years to do, but just to make like stuff like, oh, I'm just getting ideas out and sharing new art and getting feedback. Because I think, yeah, when you're working on something like a book, you need, yeah, the smaller projects to also sort of keep you going, because otherwise it puts a lot of pressure on the book to like do, this is my value. It's like, oh no, we're like, we're still sharing art. Um, yeah, and a lot of dance, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, my art class is planning on making like zines, particularly for like the student-led type thing, and so I'm kind of looking forward to that. And if we've gotten your zines at the cost production crew and using them for inspiration and ideas.
Oh, awesome. I know I got a zine disease, zines. I keep trying to make it a word. So yeah. But it's really, yeah, and I love that they're really easy to photocopy. So then it's so easy to just like give them out. Because I think sharing information on like social media is one thing, but there's something about like a handheld little, I don't know, like little thing of information like that. I don't know. It's very satisfying.
And then my last question will be, how would you encourage others to use a creative outlet?
Well, you just got to find what works naturally and intuitively for you. So for me, I tend to start with journaling. Um, so a lot of times when I'm going to sit down and make art, it's because like something's going on and I need to like, there's like energy bouncing around or thoughts bouncing around or feelings bouncing around, and like, oh, we got to like do something with it. So a lot of times in that situation, I'll start by writing, because I need to like I identify like what's going on in there, because it's normally three things tangled up. And so once you name what's going on, then I find it a lot. Then I'll start to find like pictures in that. And then we'll like lead down like, oh, maybe we'll draw about this. So that's sort of like how my art therapy process works. But also it differs depending on sort of what you need. So if maybe you're less into like, I need to draw about my feelings, maybe for you, it's more about just like physically making something on the page and playing. So like in those moments, I'll set up like like temper paint little station for myself with a bunch of paper and just like set the table and then let us play. Because sometimes we don't want to like illustrate something in here. So we just want to like do something and have that satisfaction of like seeing something emerge where there wasn't. Um, that other times it's more about partnering. Like it's something like I want to do something with other people, something that's more interactive and fun. Cause that's sometimes if I want to be social, but I'm like, well, I don't know, like I'll come up with like, oh, hey guys, we're going to do this thing. So sometimes connecting with others is part of what you need. Um, and then sometimes like I just make up songs in the woods when I'm hiking to the trees because it helps me like not be in my brain so much and just like be in the present. And so it'll come out as music. So I feel like there's so many different ways because we all think in different languages. Like some people think in flavor and they want to cook, and some people think in movement and they need to, yeah, dance around. A lot of times for me, I need to get the words can clog anything coming out. So that's why I start with some sort of writing to like identify. So that's like the key to unlock the door. And then it's like, oh, well, what is this idea? Does it want to be a zine? Does it want to be a poem? Does it want to be a drawing? And so I write down all the random ideas I get on like post-its, and I just have them in this one like folder with like all of the random ideas. So when I do have time to sit down and draw, I'll be like, oh, okay, we have all these, you know, all these little gems. And those little gems are what lead to the books. So even if you don't like make a full-fledged thing, just like jot it down in a sketchbook or somewhere, and that will stay like in your file cabinet. So future you can always go back and like repurpose it and use it for something else in the future. That was a long answer to your question.
Yeah, and I'll keep all of that in mind, especially with my writing and drawing. And I too, I started with like doing all these like longer stories and then realized like, oh, I can communicate this feeling and communicate this idea in like a three-panel comic. So I got into comics as well. And yeah, I'm gonna keep at it with that. And thank you for the interview. Um,
Yeah.
recommend The Dark Matter of Mona Starr to plenty of my friends.
I have it right here. Oh, promotion. Oh no. High five. And I think you hit the nail on the head around saying things concisely. Because if I've learned anything in my journey, my long meandering creative journey, is that to really it's getting to the point of the idea is the most important, because the number one note that I've gotten from my agent over the years is that I always back into what I'm trying to say. I never just like start with what I want to say. I just sort of like back. I'm gonna like build up to it. He's like, you gotta stop doing that. If you're gonna say something, just say it. And I think sometimes we think that it like I don't know, like dumbs it down, or like it's hard to simplify, but really that makes it accessible to just be direct because people are busy. You just gotta like, yeah, own what you're trying to say and keep it short, keep it beautiful, and maybe keep it funny. And that's what makes people actually like, yeah, be able to get into it.
All right, thank you for the interview, and I'll be on the lookout for all of your new upcoming stories and scenes as well.
Oh, thank you so much. Lovely chatting with you.